Good evening, and welcome to the State House District 121 Candidate Forum, presented by the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. I'm TJ Mays, a proud member of the Chamber's 2020 leadership team and host of KLRN's On the Record. We are honored to host tonight's forum featuring Republican candidate Representative Steve Allison and Democratic challenger Selena Montoya. It is important to note that the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce and KLRN do not endorse political candidates running for office. Rather, the purpose of this forum is to inform the voters about the candidates' positions on key issues that are of top priority to our business community. We want to thank the candidates for being here and for their willingness to address these critical issues. Now, a few words about the format of the forum. It will consist of a 25-minute discussion. The questions asked this evening were developed by the Chamber. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to give his or her opening statement. They will be asked identical questions. And each candidate will have approximately 2 minutes to respond. We just had a coin toss that determined which candidate would give the first opening statement. That candidate will be asked to give the first question, and we will rotate subsequent questions until the end of the forum. At the end, each candidate will have a chance to give a 1-minute closing statement. The order also determined by a coin toss. Selena Montoya,
Hi,
opening
TJ.
statement. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's watching. I think 2020 is a year like no other, and one where it's incredibly important for us to be able to reach out to our voters, and I'm so appreciative that you're providing this platform.
Thank you to the Chamber and KLRN.
Thank you, yes. So my name is Selena Montoya, as you have already introduced. I appreciate the time to be here. I am running for Texas House District 121, as you mentioned, and I'm doing this because this is my home. This is where I grew up. It's where my mom raised 7 of us on her own. She made ends meet by cleaning houses. Very humbling work, but hard work nonetheless. And she did it because she wanted to give us a fair shot. A fair shot because not every school was providing the same level of success or opportunity for every student. I had the opportunity to go to a school that had a wonderful reputation for sending students to college, and that's what I had the opportunity to do as well. I went away to Northwestern University and studied journalism, had an opportunity to be a fellow with the Innocence Project, and came back home, because at my heart, I'm a San Antonio girl. Came home and worked for Texas Public Radio, and I saw even more so why it was important for my mom to work so hard to ensure that we could stay in our home and go to our neighborhood school. I saw throughout the city of San Antonio the discrepancies of education opportunities and work opportunities for our community, and so I eventually left my job as a reporter, and I went and I started a nonprofit called Literacy San Antonio. And I'm so proud of the work that we've done these past 10 years, especially because in this last legislative session, one of our most important programs, which includes teacher training, was put into part of the House Bill 3. So I applaud the work that was done in the legislature and recognizing the work that we've done for so many years here in San Antonio. But I also know there's a lot more work to be done. I know that we have to expand Medicaid. If there's anything this pandemic has shown us, we're not where we need to be when it comes to serving people, their health, or their communities. We have to make sure that we're protecting the Affordable Care Act and the health care of women. We have to make sure that when we are funding schools, it's done in an equitable fashion. And when it comes to opening from COVID and recovery, we have to take a balanced approach, one that's blended and that looks at reforms for healthcare and education. And so because I've had that experience, I've had the success that we've seen when it comes to bringing forward policies in the community, I look forward to asking for your vote and for the vote of others who are in House District 121.
Thank you. Representative Steve Allison, your opening statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to make these presentations and explain to our constituents in the community what our backgrounds are. I've lived, worked, and served in this community for over 45 years, raised my family here. Both sons are products of Alamo Heights Independent School District. I had the opportunity to serve in education and in healthcare and in transportation. Serving on the Alamo Heights School Board, I've had extensive background in education. I know education. I know school finance. I've fought it for years. I advocated for teachers, advocated for additional funding for our schools and our students, and have a slogan that I like to use that I want to make sure that we have a pathway to success for each and every one of our children in Texas. I served on the VIA board for 8 years, so I know transportation and our infrastructure needs and what we have done here in San Antonio with less. And we need to do more, and what our needs are in transportation. I had a successful first session in the legislature, and I think my background and experience is so key and so important, particularly the times we face now. We're going to have a serious budget situation. We have to deal with the COVID and the recovery from COVID, but we can do that. And that's where background, experience in significant matters that are important to this community and this district, and that's what I bring. And that's why I have support from banking, from business, large and small, education, healthcare, real estate, development, and law enforcement that is so important as we try to bring safety to our community. We did a lot this last session, and I'm proud to have played a part in that. I made some promises and some representations when I ran last time, and I'm proud of the fact that I kept them. Promises made, promises kept, but we need to do more. We have to go further in education. We have to go further in our workforce development. That's a key part of education. We have to do more in healthcare. I have a strong background in healthcare and know healthcare, and that's going to be so important. We need to look at all aspects that are available to us and work in a bipartisan manner. And that's one of the strengths that I bring. I have a reputation for consensus building, for listening, and for working across the aisle that's been so effective. And I ask your support to continue that this next session.
All right, thank you for those opening statements. The first question has to do with priorities for the business community. The legislature addresses a lot of issues. There are thousands of bills filed. What are going to be your top priorities for the business community if elected?
Well, as a small business owner that was significantly affected by COVID, we have to be mindful of what that's going to look like through COVID recovery. We are going to be experiencing a budget crisis, and so we're going to have to be very careful and mindful of how we allocate those funds. One of the first things that we encountered in helping people within our community was the response from the Texas Workforce Commission and the ability to respond to the needs of individuals who found themselves suddenly out of work. We need to have systems that can meet the need, that are updated, not antiquated, that have systems that can work for the people who are in the workforce today. When it comes to the waivers that were put into place, that was one step forward that I applaud the governor for making, but those waivers need to stay in place. Again, an antiquated system that was overturned in just a single day that met the needs of people in this community. We as a workforce provider, as an employer in Bexar County and throughout Texas, found that we were going to be up against the wall when it came to being able to provide our services without the help of local authorities. You see, we were looking to the state to provide resources for COVID so that we could continue to serve the community, and it just wasn't coming. And it was the leaders here, particularly in Bexar County, Mayor Nuremberg and Judge Wolf, should not refer to them by their first names, I'm sure. But it was their work to ensure that small local businesses working with small local banks had priority, and that when we needed the PPE that was necessary to continue working in this community, that we had that. This is a case where lack of guidance from the state level was significant, and it put us significantly far behind when it came to restarting the economy and moving towards a recovery. So I think the priorities are going to be working with local authorities, ensuring they have the resources they need, giving them the opportunity, contrary to work done in SB 2, to make decisions on how they're going to use that funding, and ensuring that small businesses who make up a significant portion of the economy here in Bexar County especially have that priority.
All right, thank you. Representative Allison, what is your priority for the business community?
Well, I think we have to look at the recovery from COVID first and foremost. We need to get our economy moving again safely, and that's got to be the key, safely. And I think we can do that. We owe that to our businesses, small and large. We owe that to our community. I'm so proud of my staff in my office when COVID-19 hit. We immediately pivoted and turned our office into a resource center. Due to relationships we developed and abilities, we developed a strong relationship with Texas Workforce Commission. And we were able and fortunate to help hundreds of our constituents with PPP loans, with stimulus checks that should have been a seamless transition, but it wasn't. But most importantly, with unemployment compensation and finding jobs. The Workforce Commission finds jobs for people that I think goes unnoticed. And we were very successful in doing that. I'm very proud of that. But we need to continue. One bright spot, if you can say that, of the pandemic is that it made us focus more on regulations. And do we really need some of these regulations? And I'm proud that I played a part in that, particularly in the healthcare area, on some of the waivers that the governor instituted. Telemedicine was a key one. That was a vital need and vital importance, and it's been very, very beneficial. And I played a role in that, and I'm proud of it. Licensing. We loosened some licensing restrictions that were unnecessary. We have a shortage of physicians and medical providers in Texas. This loosened that and became very valuable during the pandemic. And I'm hopeful, very hopeful, that those are going to continue when we go back this next session and become permanent. And I think that's important for business, for our community. We need to incentivize our businesses. Some are not going to come back. We recognize that. So I think sections 312 and 313 of the tax code are going to be important. As we move forward, they'd be helpful to businesses. Those that are leaving us, we need to replace, and we need to replace with jobs and available employees, and I think we've done that.
All right, thank you. The next question we're going to begin with you, Representative Allison. A lot of businesses are reopening. We're entering a new world. We don't know what's going to happen with the virus. Businesses are worried about liability from employees or customers who may contract the virus. What is your view of a statewide liability shield for businesses?
I think we have to look at a liability shield as an incentive, but I think there's an important caveat that to be entitled to that shield, you have to make reasonable and necessary safety provisions before you're entitled to that shield. But I think it's vital for the well-being of our businesses, get them back on their feet, that they do have some liability protection after what we've gone through. But again, as long as they maintain the safety protocols.
Ms. Montoya, what do you think of liability shield?
You know, I'd be careful about passing any policy that was cookie cutter. You know, we represent an industry, fireworks, that is very heavily regulated, and it should be. You know, there are regulations that prevent someone from selling fireworks out of the back of their truck in the middle of the road. We certainly don't want that. But there are also regulations that require for double inspections from county and state fire marshals, and they don't simply have the bandwidth to actually provide those. So when we make these policies, they have to be funded, they have to be supported. It's a balance. When you talk about business and public safety, there's a balance between ensuring that the public is safe and businesses aren't impeded. And the reality is there is no one-size-fits-all solution for this.
All right, thank you. You both mentioned in your opening statements education. It's one of the biggest issues we face as a state, one of the biggest issues faced by the legislature. In the last session, there was the big historic House Bill 3, which we believe injected about $11.6 billion into the public school system. But there are concerns about sustainability and equity in the public school system. We're going to begin with you, Ms. Montoya. How do you think we should build a more sustainable, equitable school finance structure?
Well, I think we have to start by ensuring that we're going to protect that daily allotment. You're right, there is no guarantee that we're going to be able to sustain the funding for our schools. And when we couple school funding with a tax cut, that makes it even that much more difficult. In this upcoming session, we're going to have to look at every single line item. And even though the governor has, asked for protections for healthcare and human services and for education from, being a part of the 5% cut across the board, the reality is because we've been underfunding our schools for so long, critical services like communities and schools, big brothers, big sisters, STEM education, college preparatory classes, all of those are on the table, because those aren't necessarily provided under that 5% rule. The reality is that we're going to have to see if we can actually afford these things. I applaud the fact that HB 3 was passed without the need of a court order, but I credit that more to there being a bipartisan legislature. I credit that to the fact that there were 12 new Democrats asking for the things and finally getting what they've been asking for decades now. This is a situation that's been ongoing for more than 20 years. Back from when I was in school, I remember the recapture lawsuit that was introduced that affected the school district that I grew up in. And the reality is it hasn't done the job. It was a stopgap measure that was never supposed to replace the entire funding system. What it was supposed to do was create equity. But if we don't look at that through a lens of equity every single session, we see that we keep falling into the same trap of making sure that schools are underfunded. And back in 2011, when we were in a similar position of having underfunded our schools, we have yet to recover from that. I, for one, am not going to stand for the cutting of any public school education funding, and certainly am going to make sure that every effort is made to make sure that that burden is not placed on the schools and is not placed on the property owners. It's time for the state to step up.
Thank you. Representative Allison, your view of school finance and looking forward.
We're going to make it sustainable. We've fought too hard and too long. I personally have been involved too long. When I was on the Alamo School Board is when Robin Hood first came in. the recapture program. And there was a tilt in the funding system that was devastating to a number of districts around the state. We've come a long way from there, and we did a tremendous job this last session, in my opinion. And we've got to sustain that, and we've got to keep it moving forward for our children. We made tremendous strides for our teachers, but not enough. So we need to go back and do that some more. We made tremendous strides towards equity. In fact, went overboard on the equity, perhaps, compared to the past. In the past, some of the Supreme Court decisions were that you didn't provide equity. You tried to make everything equal. Well, everything isn't equal. And we recognize that finally, that certain students, certain areas need more than others. And we did that in House Bill 3, and I'm proud of that. So that we can, again, like I overused perhaps, provide a pathway to success for each and every one of our children. And we need to do that. We used the 2011 example quite often during the session. I used it, that we can't go back there again. And I think there's that commitment. Conversations and meetings I've been involved in during the interim with fellow members on the House Education Committee that I'm privileged to serve on are committed to that. The budget restrictions are not going to apply to education, and they shouldn't. We need to go forward for our children, for our education, and the connection to workforce development that's been so long neglected and has such a strong education component. And we made great strides in that area this last session under House Bill 3 and need to continue in that direction. So I'm confident we're going to continue to do that and improve education. I've long argued, long advocated that the state has to contribute more to the cost of education, just for the obligation under the Constitution, one, but for the betterment of education. And also, the more that the state puts in, it relieves the burden from the local taxpayers, and that's important because property taxes are an important burden. So for those reasons, we're going to continue as well.
All right, thank you. School finance is very complicated. Another issue that's pressing to our community is transportation. Finance of transportation, also very complicated. Representative Allison, what are your views about how we can use state investment to keep up with the growth that San Antonio and Bexar County is experiencing?
Well, it's important. You know, I served 8 years on the VIA board, so well-versed in infrastructure needs and transportation needs that we have here. You know, VIO operates less than other major metropolitan area transit authorities, but has done very well with that less funding. But there's an acute need towards transportation. We're going to have an influx of population of at least another 1 million in the next 20 years, and we're not prepared for that right now, so we need to focus on education. The pandemic has created a problem. Because gasoline tax proceeds are down because people weren't driving as much. Oil and gas went down. Both of those are key components to the transportation funding. So we're going to have to compensate for that until it comes back. And I think we can do that. Locally, I think the proposition that's going to be on the ballot is important. I think there's going to have to be more local focus on transportation needs and infrastructure needs. We're going to have to look to the federal government. I know from experience the funding that's available from the federal government in transportation areas, but a lot of it hinges on local involvement, local participation. So we're going to need to look more at public-private partnerships, and I think our community is prepared for that in the construction industry, other major industries within the community to participate and contribute, and I think that's important. We need to look at alternative funding mechanisms. If our traditional ones from the sales tax and gasoline tax and oil and gas revenues aren't going to be sufficient, we need to look elsewhere. Do we look at bonding programs again that have been used in the past? I think we need to put everything on the table and see what we need because we have acute transportation needs that we need to address.
Thank you. Ms. Montoya, what do you think about transportation funding moving forward?
Well, I think one of the things that we're saying that we need to do is utilize those matching funds and coordinated funds from the federal government so that we can realize the best use of every dollar for dollar. We also need to make sure that when we are talking about our gas tax, that it's actually keeping up with inflation. You know, we've got decades worth of lack of upkeep, not only on the state level, but on the federal level as well, and we have the opportunity to make that change. You know, I think it's interesting that the chair of the Transportation Committee, Terry Canales, mentioned a very specific number, $800 million in a shortfall for transportation. You know, $800 million is exactly what was utilized for border security, for drones, Border security, while an important piece of the federal government's responsibility, I think is a place where the state of Texas can actually recoup the investment. One, because there's such a great need, but also because there's just such a I think a disparity when it comes to not only the transportation needs of income and trade coming through our borders, most of which comes via truck. But also because there's a need to ensure that we are maintaining those partnerships. As we are recovering from this, we have to constantly keep in mind it's not just about infrastructure, it's about economy too. That infrastructure absolutely includes roads, and it also includes things like our broadband internet services. These are things that should be considered utilities, not luxuries. These are the things that provide for commerce, not take away. And these are the things that should remain public, not private. We need to ensure that there are no roads that are going to be tolled, no double taxing for people who are using the streets here in Texas. And we have an opportunity to do that if we have the leadership that's willing to stand up for it.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question. The last several legislative sessions, there's been this back and forth between mayors and county judges and the state about local control versus state preemption of local control, and this has been underlying many of the debates that have been going on. We're going to start with you, Ms. Montoya. What is your view of this local control idea, and how much control should local governments have over the decisions made in those localities?
Yeah, I think the reality is when it comes to economic drivers in the state of Texas, cities are the #1 drivers in this seat. So we have to make sure that we're certainly working together, but also, again, not impeding business. I, for one, am very proud to be from San Antonio and from a place where our local leaders are doing everything in their power to make sure that they're meeting the needs of Texans and people here in this city based on their healthcare needs, based on opening up for businesses, based on school districts, really going beyond what the call of duty is, simply because, once again, the state is not providing their share of leadership, their share of funding, or what they can do to make sure that they're meeting the needs of people here in San Antonio. Again, as a small business owner, turning to the state was not an option for us. It was only met with frustration, and the reality is that the folks here in San Antonio and Bexar County were there for us in our time of need, when we were realizing unemployment rates that were just unimaginable, when we saw oil reach negative $37 a barrel, when we saw that the run on PPE was just untenable to meet the needs of opening our economy. They stepped in. They should receive the recognition for taking that responsibility, but they shouldn't be receiving the burden of continuing that. So I think it's important that you have leaders that can work on every single level of government to make sure that we're supporting each other, not preventing people from helping each other out.
Representative Allison, your views on local control versus state control?
Well, thank you. I believe the question was local control. I've long been an advocate of local control. I firmly believe that government works best at the lowest level. And the local level is where people are most knowledgeable, know what the local conditions are, the local needs, the local requests from the constituents, and just functions best there, whether it's a school district, a city, or whatever. And I've long advocated that. I'm proud of the fact that as part of House Bill 3, I advocated strongly that we make sure that the local control components remained within House Bill 3, and they did. I think that's just vitally important for our children. We saw it during the pandemic. I think we need to focus on that, the importance of local interest and local control, local knowledge. With the pandemic, we saw some in the rural areas, for example, that didn't experience any cases whatsoever. No reason why they should be subjected to a statewide mandate when they know what their local conditions are and local needs, so that they can proceed and keep moving. The same thing with local school districts. They know what their needs are, they know what their abilities are, what their local constituents want and need, and I think it works best that way, as long as we can keep it consistent and moving forward, which I think we do. I think local control's got to be part of the Texas history.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to our closing statements, 1 minute each, based on the coin toss. I think Representative Allison, you're first.
Thank you. And again, thank you for this opportunity. I think that the Chamber does a great job and a great service. I've enjoyed working with the Chamber for many years now, and it's a proud product and byproduct of San Antonio. As we move forward, background, experience, knowledge, honesty, integrity, character, trust, results, I think are important. Not just rhetoric, but actions. And not just actions, but results. That's what I bring, that's what I've brought, that's what I've proven. And I think that's vitally important. And the ability to get along and work in a bipartisan way. And I've proved that with results. And I think that's vitally important. And that's why I enjoy such broad-based support and continue to have that support from banking to business, education, law enforcement, real estate. It's across the board. And there's a reason for that, because they know me, they trust me. I've worked with them. I've developed business. I know business. I know healthcare. And that's what's made me so productive and helpful and useful to this community. And I ask that I be able to continue that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Montoya, your closing statement.
Well, thank you again, TJ, for moderating this, and to KLRN and the Chamber for having us here. You know, I think at the end of the day, the reality is that the work that's going to lie ahead of us at the Chamber, or rather the legislature, is going to be one that is going to be full of big, hard decisions, decisions that shouldn't be taken lightly, and decisions that need to be informed by the people, not special interests, not corporate PACs, not private donors. And the reality is, when it comes to the people in this district, they're looking for leadership. They're asking for leaders who are, in fact, working with the schools that are underserved, that are working in small businesses and who are experiencing the recovery firsthand, that are raising the future of the state, like myself. I know firsthand the issues that our community is facing, and the solutions that are provided for us are based on not only listening to those who are here in our community, but also being able to look towards the future. And so I appreciate the opportunity again to come here and talk about what that vision for the future looks like. And I encourage everyone to make sure they go and vote starting October 13th.
All right, thank you, Selena Montoya, Democratic challenger, Representative Steve Allison, the Republican incumbent. And thank you for joining us for this special presentation of Meet the Candidates, hosted by the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. Hear a podcast of this program or watch it again online at klrn.org. Good night.